Good afternoon. To today's Police and Crime Panel meeting, and welcome to all. I notice we have a county councillor, but I'm going to say at least a member of the public. So welcome. It's always nice to have someone to come to watch us. Thank you very much. Welcome to today's meeting of the Police and Crime Panel, which is being webcast live to the public. For those not able to watch the footage live, the webcast will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Please can I remind members to switch their microphone on when speaking and to turn it off when they have finished speaking, and also to either switch off their telephone or at least put it on silent. Moving on to the minutes of the meeting. Willie, I understand you've got a correction to make on the minutes.
I have, Chair. At page 5 of the minutes, at paragraph 8,
Yep.
I think it should read that the membership of the Youth Commission at present does not include people who've been involved with criminal activity.
Okay.
If I didn't get that across at the last meeting, I apologise.
Okay.
But that's the fact of the situation.
Right. Members, a lot for your approval? No disapproval, obviously, that's fine, and been amended to read as such, Willie. Thanks very much for that. Before we get to public question time, we have to have apologies because we have quite a significant number today. I don't know whether it's the annual lurgy beginning to strike or not, but these are as follows. Trevor Pendleton has sent his apologies, and it looks like his substitute hasn't been able to make it, Mr. Bridges. Janice Richards sends her apologies, as does Manjula. Alan Walters stands a small chance of making it, but the way his email read, I don't think so. Councillor Melise Graham sent his apologies in a while ago. He arranged a substitute in Alan Pearson, who also sent his apologies in today. Rattledale's here. Stephen Correll, we just note his absence. Don't have any more apologies unless you're going to tell me anything different to that. It's all as noted. Okay, thank you very much. Public question time. I haven't been notified of any at all. Urgent items. There aren't any urgent items, but there's a couple of news items really, and so I'm going to just use this space for that. One is, it's simply I will be leaving this meeting at 3 o'clock. I genuinely think we should be over by then, but I seriously have to be in Melton for 4. And with the traffic conditions as they are nowadays, you never quite know. And I've got to get to the other side of Melton. So I will be leaving at 3, but if we are still running, Michael will kindly take over to finish off the meeting. Now, the other one is I went to an area police crime panel meeting, which is where the 5 counties get together. It's twice a year now, isn't it? And I picked up that the Home Office is doing a review of the effectiveness of police crime panels. We've managed to track down this a little bit more. We found out a lady called Lauren Diffie, who's described quite a good description, isn't there, to it. If you go on Twitter anyway, you can find her easy enough on Twitter. She's certainly much into policy. That's what she drives home. We have written to Lauren through a third party to say that this panel is up for talking to her when she's ready. I always think it's best to be involved right at the start rather than waiting for someone then to come along and say, can we meet you? So we wait to hear from Miss Diffie, and we look forward to taking part in to the effectiveness of police crime panels when the time comes. Declarations of interest, I don't believe we will have any at all today. So we move on to the main agenda very quickly, the performance report. Sorry, what are you saying?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to, when you're ready, I'm happy just to very briefly introduce this long report, which I know panel members will have read, but delighted to say that Deputy Chief Constable Rob Nixon is here to answer questions and talk about this report too, for the benefit of the panel. We all understand that you are holding me and my office to account But this is a report that's actually written by, sorry, is that me? Is that this one? Are we all right? That, very impressive, you and that is.
I was going to say, Willie, I always think actually the performance reports, the quarter, is probably the most important paper of all to this panel. It really is a good reflection on how the force is performing, and we all take great note of this. So I'll look forward to you giving an introduction. Now also, the PCC has already said we are here to hold the PCC to account, but also to support the PCC as well in the good work. That's important to measure. So if we can try and keep to the PCC and questions to the PCC and keep away from operational matters if possible, please. Over to you, Willie.
Thank you very much. In fact, there's very little I want to say. I think it's, because the report speaks for itself, I think the vital pages are the context pages that do set this performance report into context. This committee knows very well the difficulties that there have been in terms of funding over the last number of years, how that's affected, it's paragraph 7 in particular, how it's affected, we've lost 1 million fewer policing hours each year. I mean, that's a very large figure, and you'll see the figures that there were, that the Leicestershire Constabulary had in April 2011 and what they stand at now. Those are important factors. They don't explain everything, of course. In my own view, there is in some fields definitely an increase in crime. It'd be foolish to pretend that there isn't. Why that increase has arisen in those fields is a matter that the panel will want to consider. Partly it's to do with austerity, partly it's to do with more recording. First of all, people coming forward to complain, make a justifiable complaint. But it's also partly, and it may be that the Deputy Chief Constable will be able to help with this, the rules now, and we've said this before, for recording crime are incredibly harsh, in the sense that everything that comes in, effectively, there could be a crime, has to be recorded as a crime. And it's on the basis of recorded crime that you get the figures that are in front of you. And my own personal view, and I think it's quite widely shared, is that that criteria is too harsh, to be honest, and some absurd things are recorded as crime, which frankly aren't crime at all, and absolutely no chance of being investigated. I'm talking, for example, about, I used this example before, 3 youths in town late at night shouting something to a passerby. Not pleasant, perhaps ASB, antisocial behaviour. By the time someone complains, by the time the police arrive, the 3 youths are nowhere to be seen, but more importantly, nor is the person who made the complaint, or the person. That really has to be recorded, and if there are 3 users, I understand it has to be recorded as 3 crimes. And I mean, that is just an example of what recorded crime has to show these days. But I don't want anything I say about that to take away from the fact that I think we are living in a difficult time, and there are certain crimes that are increasing, actually increasing in numbers. Although I just say, always beware crime figures. You're talking about some crimes, for example, that perhaps aren't crimes at all, that are recorded, and then on the other end, you've got crimes that are committed that no one ever reports. So you always have to take crime figures with a pinch of salt. So that's, I wanted to just make that point, but I think otherwise the report speaks for itself, and we are very happy to take questions and try and explain parts of this quite long report that may not be clear. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Willie. Members, I'll do my normal. I will take each section as it comes along. So if you can try keep up with us and get your question in at the appropriate time. I will go back, but it's easier to hit it at the right time if that's possible. I'd just like to ask you one question from that brief introduction there, Willie. And it's a question I've thought about asking for a long, long time, but never dare quite have the nerve on it to ask it. But today's the day, I think. And that is there any intelligence on, shall we say, has there been any increase in non-reporting, i.e. where people just say, what's the point of reporting it? Is there any intelligence on that sort of action from the public?
I think to say any sophisticated intelligence, probably not. But last night I was in northwest Leicestershire at a barn meeting. These are meetings that Northwest Leicester District are putting on around rural crime for businesses, farm businesses, people who live and work in the rural areas. And I'm being absolutely frank with you, there were a couple of guys who asked questions, and one of them started the question by saying that they did occasionally have such trouble getting through on 101, and I'm being absolutely frank with the panel here, that he and others sometimes didn't bother to report very minor offences. And so that's anecdotal, and I dare say you'd get that elsewhere as well. I think on the whole, on some really serious cases though, I mean, I'm talking about rape, for example, sexual violence. I think on the whole, over the last 5 or 10 years, my view is that more people were prepared to come forward because of the way in which the police treat them and because of other organisations that advise them to come forward and say their piece. They don't always stay. Some of them will make the complaint and then change their minds. But I think there's little evidence, I'm afraid, either way to show whether people are not as prepared to report crime as they were in the past. It's something we'd like to, in a way, it's impossible really to find out. But it was interesting last night to have had that just before the panel today.
Maybe because I'm in live in that sort of same environment, but certainly recently I had my 3 green waste garden bins nicked, and I reported those anyway. So there we go.
And we do, sorry, as far as Chairman, we do tell, and I was saying it, I think so many times it was boring last night, do report. We really want the public to report. Maybe a pain for the police, it may be a pain for everybody, but if people are the victims of crime, they should report that crime.
Fully support that, Willie. Okay, members, it's over to you effectively. Agenda item 5, we're on page 9, which is the introduction to all of this. So we have context on page 9, 10, 11, Abdul first, 11, and we'll take 12 and 13 as well. So Abdul and then Ratalal.
Sorry, Chair, I've jumped in terms of your pages then, have I? In terms of the questions that I'm going to ask. Oh, I wanted to ask something within the brief of the report, page 21. Is that, or shall I come back at it, Chair?
Can we come back?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Chair. I think I just want to come back on this 101 and 999. I just want to make a point clear. I don't want to make a complaint about the police. It's the process on 101 and 999. Often people do call, they get frustrated. I mean, I've had the 2 incidents personally. I know Robert's dealt with mine, so I'm not issuing about that. But as you know, I chair the jewelers on the Golden Mile. Now, they were a victim, and although local debate officers have dealt with the matters, I'm grateful for that, and the PCC has been made aware of that as well. But I think there is some sort of review need to be done on that process, because often the call handler does not respond the way that need to be responded, or give some sort of assurance answers that the person who's making a call, they are satisfied with the response, you see. So some sort of training is, a review need to be required on that basis as well.
Chair, with your permission, I'll ask Rob to respond to Rathlell's question.
Rathlell, thank you. You and I have had a number of conversations around some of this. I guess there's two bits that I'd probably break away from. One would be the challenge that we had last year was dealing with the volume and being able to answer the phone within the time. And certainly from a 101 perspective, the vast majority of calls now are getting answered between sort of 30 seconds and a minute. So actually, if you do a comparison between non-emergency and emergency 999, the performance is really good. I think the point you raise around what does that then lead to, I think we've got quite a wicked problem, because you've got the volume and demand that is increasing. Public expectation of what a response might be is quite high. Most people would say, I want a response and I want somebody to come to my house and I want it to be there really quickly, and this is what I expect. There is the harsh reality, the volume of demand versus some of the things that are getting reported and the available resource, that we are going to have to work through some really tricky issues about what our service offer looks like in some areas. Now, do I think we're getting that totally right all of the time? Probably not. And I think the good thing is we're constantly reviewing it, looking at it. And part of the stuff that I know Paul is going to talk through, which I'm going to look forward to, is Paul presenting what we're doing around our change programme transformation. And within that context, what we're looking for is how much can we move from more towards the front end, getting an earlier resolution. Now, that might require us at some point to take some tough choices around reinvesting in certain parts of policing to try and meet more of that expectation. But invariably, there are only so many resources, and they would have to get redistributed from somewhere else. So certainly something we're alive to. We've improved the 101. I think we're certainly getting better around assessment, but it's a challenge because expectations here and the reality of the resourcing is there, and somewhere in the middle sometimes there's some tension.
Okay, Melanisa, and then Deborah.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to make an observation before I ask my question. One is, I think reading this report, it's really clear. It's not only is it illuminating, but it's quite harrowing read. So, and I think you've put it very succinctly, that crime, particularly some aspects of serious crime, is going up. Resources are constrained. There's somewhere in this report about a real drop in terms of frontline staff of 418, from 2011. And that is actually not sustainable going forward, given the rise in crime, or different kinds of crime as well. And so effective policing is going to be a real challenge going forward. And I would really like to hear, in terms of the Police and Crime Commissioner, how are we going to kind of manage this going forward in Leicestershire? But my question really is on page 10. And it's a bit of clarity for me because maybe I'm not reading this right. But C talks about the offender management team actively managing prolific and dangerous offenders, 328, and it's an increase from an end of the year figure of 12. Is this a typo? It's over 200% increase. And then we talk about reduction. Could somebody explain this to me?
Your general point, the point you made before you asked the question, which I'll ask Rob to answer, the general point is a good point. That is why I'm being kept, my office and myself, being kept very much in the knowledge from the police as to what their intentions are in order to deal with this rise that we think is happening, particularly in serious crime. So we're informed, and I encourage absolutely new ways of dealing with it that the police are thinking of doing. How the package will end up in the end isn't quite clear yet, but I want the panel to be absolutely aware that all parts, the police force and my office, are very, very alive to what is happening and how it's going to need, even with resources that are much too low, it's going to need in some ways a new approach, and one that the public will of course know about, but will have to be patient with us on it, because this is no longer a time when the public can just say, we think the policing has enough resources to deal with the issues that there are. I think many members of the public realise already that, not unlike local authorities in some ways, but that the police, who are such a vital part of our society in keeping people secure, are really feeling the pain now in terms of being able to cope with much of the crime that's happening at the present time. I think they're doing a great job here, and I think you'll find that those who commit really serious crimes have little chance of getting away with it, to be honest. But it's the volume of crime, particularly at the low end, for example. There, I think the public, again, have to be told in absolutely straight terms that the police can't do everything within their resources. That's the honest truth, and the panel should be the ones who hear it. As to your question, can I pass to Rob? Because I think there probably is a misprint.
Just before Rob answers, Willie, I'd just like to remind everyone that the latest HMIC report, which I presume was published by Zoe Billingham, was good. Yeah? So well done to the force.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
That's true. Our recent HMIC reports have been pretty excellent, really. And I think at the moment, that may change, they have quite a high opinion of the Leicester Police Force.
Chairman, can I be as bold as to say as well that actually when they do inspection, they take very little cognizance of resource and finance. They look around the service delivery bit. So the challenge we have is that they will come in with a checklist against what is a gold standard service, but they won't put any weighting on resource availability, shrinkage, budgets. It's about the service. So to get a good grading, there's a lot of people immensely proud of the work that went into that. So thank you for that reference. Coming back to the C, page 10, IOM, Integrated Offender Management. But what I read that to be is actually the cohort has increased by 12, and the fact that they're over the year, the rolling year, so they're managing 12 more in there. What I will say is we've done quite a bit of work. So there's the Strategic Partnership Board now that obviously Willie has got, and under that we've set up what is a Strategic Offender Management and Mapper Board, which I now chair. And we're starting to look at the integrated approach to offender management, as well as how that then feeds in and takes people from serious and organised crime. There's a really, really good agreement across at senior level now across all of the agencies that MAPPA, which is obviously a legal requirement for agencies to come together and deal with people that are causing the most harm, that we will start to use the MAPPA process across the different agencies to really focus in on some of those that are involved in serious and organised crime. I personally think what you'll see within that offender management is you'll see the numbers increasing, and I'm really, really grateful because actually we're not doing it alone. So our integrated offender managements are really robust with National Probation Service and the local CRC and the youth service. But now what we're doing is that's been incorporated and integrated within the MAPPA process, which is bringing together mental health, local authority, and I think there's a real good opportunity there. So I'm really confident that that's going in the right direction.
Okay. Thank you. So just for my clarity, because I mean that's helpful that it's only an increase of 12, because this doesn't say that. This actually reads different. So there is a typo there.
I read it exactly the same as
I know.
you. I had a query by it, but in fact that's what it means.
Yeah.
So it was 316, gone up to 328.
That's how I read it.
Okay, Deborah.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points on page 12 under the headlines. You've got in the second bullet point, Leicestershire's ranked 25th nationally. How many police forces is that? 43. Thank you. Halfway. And then also I was quite surprised that there was nothing about county lines or knife crime within those headlines, and just wondered what had happened to those. Has the crime gone down, or why they're not included in the headlines?
I think it's because what they're looking at there is it's the Home Office figures that they're tracking and doing comparisons. County lines is one of our priorities at the moment, and we've got loads of activity going on around county lines and what I think I talked about last time I came. The reason that it's not in there is because actually they're falling in with different categories. So county lines principally is linked, there'll be elements linked to serious and organised crime, violence, drug supply, exploitation. They naturally aren't fitting within the recorded crime categories that the Home Office are tracking, if that makes sense. So that's why they're literally tracking comparison for Home Office stats, but locally we are looking at county lines in quite a big way.
As to knife crime, that appears later in the paper. Just want to say something about county lines, if I may. Something I learnt last night, really impressive. North West Leicestershire District Council, working with the police and with other partners, got 7 orders for closures of, I don't know how the legal expression for this, of houses, flats or houses, as a consequence going to the court and getting those closure orders, which means that those who live there, the tenants there, or owners there, are out. And this was all around the issue of drugs and county lines. And that is quite impressive, and they're quite rightly proud of it. I think there has been some publicity around that, but I think that's a bit of an achievement, I have to say. That means there's 7 less places in that part of Leicestershire where it's easy for criminals who are exploiting others with their drugs, who can no longer do it, or certainly can't do it for the time being.
Yes, thanks for that, Willie. And I can say I know of other local authorities in the county that are looking at that. Just very quickly, on the side, it's only, again, because of you saying that and also Deborah's question about knife crime. I've noticed on BBC East Midlands, your colleagues in Nottingham have really raised the profile of knife crime. Have Leicestershire got any thoughts to follow?
I get a sense of something about timing, because I think if I could bring a catalogue of things where we've been on the TV, the radio, we've done all sorts of sort of partnership sort of events into schools. I mean, Shane O'Neill is our sort of silver level. I initially kicked it off. It's now with our Jason Masters as the gold. There's huge amounts going on with this. We had Anthony Joshua, who's a local sponsor that obviously got involved in a national campaign. Knife crime is right up there. We've got a dedicated team dealing with it and a rolling programme. We linked into the national campaign this week, but actually it's business as usual for us now to continue to do it.
Thanks very much, Rob. Keith, sorry, I forgot. My fault. Yeah.
Weeks. Sorry. Should I repeat? No, sorry. I just wanted to say, highlighting that the digital hub work, we're at the forefront. But if we're reducing that turnaround time, we're, in a sense, it's wonderful, it's to be applauded, but we are victims of our own success, because if the turnaround time is reduced unbelievably from 108 weeks to 5 weeks, that actually, as you already highlighted, with shrinking resources, the demand, you are increasing your own demand. So whilst it's to be applauded, and I think it's wonderful, that in itself does bring, I imagine, operational stresses, although it's to be applauded.
You're right and wrong. And I say that because actually you're right in terms of the work that we're having to do to go from the 500 plus down to where we are now. But inadvertently, what we're doing is we're capturing the evidence quicker, so we're able to then charge quicker. So we're getting control of it. So the idea is to prevent continued recidivism. The challenge here with the digital and the high-tech side is more and more people have multiple devices. So where in old-fashioned days we'd have one phone each, wouldn't we? Now you go through an address and you can come out with, 3-4 phones, 2 tablets, a laptop, and a tower unit. So for one investigation, you end up with 8 or 9 items that all require some sort of forensic analysis, triaging, and then what then comes on the back of that is the disclosure issues. Because it's all right getting the time down to get the product off it. You've then got to look at what's disclosable, what's not disclosable. So it does generate a lot of work, a huge amount of work, but the good thing is we are capturing and charging people quicker.
just before we move on to the next section, as Melton hasn't got a representative here, I notice under 11I it talks about the force looking at neighbourhood policing in Melton area. Melton Borough Council have just appointed 3 dedicated neighbourhood officers actually, so we're really beefing up in that section. And when you think of the size of Melton, 3 dedicated officers, substantial investment. Yeah. Okay, thank you members. Moving on to page 15, and I will take each section as it comes. National increase in crime. Deborah.
My question was on page 14, which I think you've missed out. Is that all right if I go back to page 14?
It's appropriate you got in first.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A couple of things on there. The increase in rape of over 50%, I'm obviously very concerned about that, and I just wondered what your thoughts were about what is more reporting and what is actual rape going up. How can you look into that, and what's your view on that? And my other thing is about the shoplifting and working with the shops. I know within Charnwood we've got really prolific shoplifters, but the issue is the police are trying to work with the national chains of supermarkets and shops and giving them advice, and they're not heeding that advice. So we end up with more and more reports for shoplifting that the police can do nothing about because the chains of supermarkets are not working with them. So I just wonder what you can do to try and get on board the shops to try and help themselves rather than just relying on the police all the time. So just both those points, please.
They're fair points. Shoplifting first, that's a real issue. It's a real issue because sometimes, and let me say it quite openly, some of the big stores don't help themselves or help the police very much. And there's loads they could do in relation, for example, things that they have on offer. If they put those right almost on the street, and this has been known to happen, it's hardly a surprise if people come and nick them, I'm afraid, in this modern age. But there are other things as well. But there's lots of discussions going on around this and what the police service should be doing about it. Of course, if someone is caught in a shop and is there, the police will go. Otherwise, I think there are problems, and Rob may want to say a word or two more about this. As to rape, of course, it's a concern. There is more rape reporting, so that undoubtedly is part of it. And you get people reporting and then complaining and then deciding they don't want to see the issue through. Stranger rape, which is of course all rape is completely outrageous, but stranger rape is the worst type of rape there can be, is very, very low, very, very low. Many of these rapes arise out of domestic violence and domestic abuse generally, but the figures are worrying. The only thing I can say is that's 1 year. But if you look at the MSF rank in that column, that's third in terms of volume, those first figures, 3rd out of 8 and 10th out of 43. So I'm making the point that this is a national issue, a national problem in which we are, of course, involved and are concerned about. Likewise with the outcomes, the positive outcomes, everyone nationally, we've seen it in the papers, people are dissatisfied with the positive outcomes there are as far as rape is concerned. But our outcome, certainly last year, up to May 2018, was the best of the 8 MSF. MSF isn't, in my view, that needs to be looked at again because I'm not sure all those forces are the most similar forces these days. But that's all we've got to go on at the moment. But Deborah, you're absolutely right. This is a worry for the force. Maybe that Rob wants to say a word about it.
On one hand, I'm really pleased because actually people are coming forward and reporting it. What we see, and Willie's correct in the fact that actually you've got a number of patterns. So where it's then a stranger rape and somebody's being targeted, which is what a lot of people are really, really fearful of, they are very few in number, and actually we've caught nearly every offender and they've all been brought to justice. So on that end, that feels like it's really good. You then see a number of other patterns that are emerging. One is around some historical stuff. So you get an allegation of something which is historic, and then it might have happened over multiple years. So you've ended up with multiple occurrences. So it's not you were raped between 2013 and 14. It was on January, this date, this occurred. So you can get multiple reports of rape with one victim over a longer duration. So that's one thing we see. We do see allegations of rape within the domestic setting, and you also see allegations of people that have gone out on a night out, gone back, they've met somebody, they've gone back to a location and something's happened, and it's one saying it was consensual, the other one saying it's not. These are really complicated, and generally on a Monday morning when we have our Monday morning briefing, I'll always make a point of going through the rapes, because invariably there's a high percentage of people that don't want to see them through, so they'll contact us, and then as you start to get into the process, they don't want to go through a medical examination, they're not prepared to make a statement, it becomes really, really chaotic. And some of the officers, and I think we've got some outstanding people working in this area, their stress comes from they want to do the right thing. There's a lot of hurdles they have to go through in order to try and get that that sort of offender brought to justice. So, you know, that sort of conviction rate is not great. But actually, when you understand how many complainants don't want to provide medical evidence, they don't want to provide a statement, they withdraw throughout the process through legitimate reasons, they all get recorded as rape.
Just on the shoplifting, I mean, obviously at the end of the day, it's costing us all shoplifting. I suspect prices would drop more than 10% if we could stop it overnight, which we won't do. And the answer's got to be in technology, hasn't it, really, when you think about it? And it will come in the end. Anyway, moving on. Page 15, national increase in crime. Over the page, page 16. On to page 17, violence against person without injury. Page 18, knife crime. Rattle, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. It's against knife crime. I know the force are doing quite well, educating the people, and we know that this week, sorry.
No, the force doing well, yes.
Yeah, the force are doing quite well as well, and the awareness is taking place as we speak. But still, there's a quite number of incidents occurring towards the knife incidents. And I mean, when I say knife incidents, there are serious incidents occurring within my area as well, or within the city area, let's put it this way. How are we catching the culprits? That's the question.
Rattler, I'd
You're
say,
getting very close to operational here, really, Rattle, aren't you? If you just answer it.
I'll keep it really brief, Chair, if you're okay with that. Effectively, I think there's two levels. Okay, there's the targeted operations that we go for those where there's intelligence, and we suspect that people might be involved in carrying knives. Let's be candid. A lot of the people that are carrying knives are either on the fringe of or getting involved in some form of criminality. So targeting that and how that links to other forms of criminality like drug supply and gangs is something that clearly we've got a rolling programme that we're looking at doing. I think the key issue is how we try to, again, get that deterrent effect and get people, because people in the community know who these people are. They need to come, they need to step up, and they need to pass that information so that we can do something about it.
Okay. If members have interest in operational matters, please take the opportunity to have a word with Rob after the meeting. Deborah.
Thank you. It's on page 19, but within knife crime. I'm trying to follow your instructions, Chair. On point 47 about the government's investment of £22 million over 2 years, how much have we got in Leicestershire and what is it going to be used for?
We're waiting to hear. We've put the bid in, and we're waiting to hear. And Simon Down, who's going to speak to us later, is the panel later, sitting here. He's the officer who's worked up the bid. We've put it in, and we've asked for a lot of money. How much we get, we will report back. But it's an important fund.
Do you know when the decision's due?
Well, it won't be tomorrow. I mean, we know that because the bid only had to go in, I think, at the end of last week, Friday last week. So it may be a month or two, but the sooner the better.
It sounds like 2 months, doesn't it, at least? That's how these things are. Anything else on page 18, 19, knife crime? If not, we move on to, still on page 19, rape. Over the page. Page 20, rape. Hate. Deborah.
Just under point 54 there, the commissioning process for the SARC's been completed. Do we have a copy of that at all, the strategy, or is that available to us?
Well, we can provide that. You do give me the chance, Deborah, to say that I think our SARC is absolutely superb, rather like the digital hub. It's actually one of those things that we can be particularly proud of here, and it's absolutely superb. I mean, those who are unfortunate enough to be the victims of these serious crimes should know that they will be really well looked after and cared for in the SARC. And I also went the other day to the opening of the children's SARC, which is a private house, which is a house in the middle of a built-up part of Greater Leicester, not many miles from here, not many miles, and that is a superb place for poor child victims of this kind of offence to be taken to. I think we're right in the top league on that.
Any information you have, Lord Bob, just send it on to you.
Yeah, we'll get the information to you. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Still on page 20, hate crime. Page 21. Is it on hate crime or burglary, Abdul? Hate crime.
Okay, thank you, Chair. It's paragraph 59 in terms of anticipating the increase of ongoing Brexit negotiation, and I'm not going to be political here, but obviously it's something that we don't know what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. But is there an opportunity for us to be able to put in some additional resources, or ask the government to be able to give us something for the future if this is anticipated, obviously on the increase? It might be an opportunity for us to take that advantage. And I know we're in a bit of a recipe of where the money's going to go and if it's diverted back into the UK, or if there are going to be any resources within this area. The other issue is, for my information, I'd like to have a monitoring breakdown, if any, in relation to racial and religious hate crime that's come in. And I know on page 14 it's ranked at 2, but it would be for my interest to be able to have that.
Thank you very much, Abdul, for the questions. I'm one of the 3 PCCs who is dealing with the security issues around Brexit. I mean, the relationship between the police in this country and the police in EU countries is a very close relationship, with a lot of very valuable crime-busting work being done from the arrest warrant right through. In fact, I'm going to Brussels next week in order to discuss this at a high level in Brussels on behalf of the 3 PCCs involved. And so I know that the police here are always alive to events that may lead to an increase in hate crime, and we've seen a number of those. And one of those, of course, is Brexit, if and when it occurs on 29th of March next year. And Rob may be able to say a bit more about what's planned there. As to the information you get, we're going to have a hate crime later on in this agenda. There's a hate crime issue paper which Simon Down is going to introduce, and he may be able to answer your question.
Okay.
I'll keep it really brief. I think from certainly locally, what do we think the impact of Brexit is? Well, we're anticipating that increased demand, increased reporting, increased requirement for some reassurance policing, something around our renewed capability to respond to any protests that we might get. So certainly we're starting to put in place a bit of a structure. Now, we haven't got loads of extra resources, so this is not about us being able to say, well, we anticipate a load of increased demand, therefore we're going to wheel these new resources out. What we are going to try to do is recognise that in neighbourhoods we're going to need to try and restrict and minimise as much as possible any sort of abstractions during that period, so that neighbourhood staff are at least as connected as they possibly can be with the local. there is a reality that neighbourhood staff do get abstracted for slightly wider operations, but I think during that period what we're saying is we need as many of our neighbourhood officers to be in their local communities, responding to what the local community concerns are and providing that reassurance during that period of concern. And at the same time, I think we'll be looking to ensure that we've got some oversight and scrutiny around what is reported to make sure that we're responding quickly. So certainly in terms of the increased demand around hate crime and reassurance, I think we've got a plan in place for that. We've got a structure now, so Jason Masters has been appointed as our gold for Brexit. He's linked into the national discussions, and we've taken it into our local resilience forum, because the other impact that we might experience is as processes change at places like strategic infrastructure sites, so you know they'll be talking about the ports etc down south, but we've got an airport, so actually is it going to take longer to get onto a plane? What does that then mean? Well, actually, if you've got X number of flights and it currently takes that time and it's now going to take that time, you've got more people, more crowded place, more hostility. So there's all sorts of things being worked through around critical infrastructure type policing. But I'd say that it's fairly early on. We're dealing with some unknowns, but there's a lot of planning.
Very interesting enough, I'm supposed to be in a meeting in Nottingham at the moment where a lady called Suella Braverman, who's MP, Parliamentary Under Secretary of State of the Department for Exiting the European Union. She's given a seminar to a number of local authorities on the impact of Brexit. So all of a sudden, actually that seminar tells me it's getting very real now. I say that to someone who voted Remain. So there we go. Page 21, burglary. Page 22. Page 22, robbery person. Page 23. Theft of motor vehicle on page 23. 24. Theft from motor vehicle. Page 25. Drugs. Page 26. Confidence and satisfaction, user satisfaction. Page 27, recorded incidents of antisocial behaviour. Page 28, financial implications, basically. Well, obviously, members, there's nothing else you want to go back onto, because, like I say, it's an important paper, but effectively this does reflect what HMIC found in May, really. So it's a good, solid report. Now, there isn't a recommendation, but I will be asking you to note the recommendation, at least with a show of hands, because, like I said, it is an important report, so all in favour to note report. Okay, thank you very much. Operation Darwin, is it now? Okay.
Next.
Operation Darwin. Here we go.
We should have
It's an oral, so this is slides. So what's going to happen now? So who's going to present it? Paul? You're going to present it, are you?
This is the thing that Rob flagged up earlier, that he'll be watching me with hawk-eye intent to check I don't step out of line and say something I shouldn't. No, it is. I mean, I do it a little bit of trepidation with Rob sitting there, especially he keeps looking at me like oh, sorry, yeah. Because Rob is leading this, and I think this is an excellent area of work. There's an awful lot of detail in here, though, so I don't propose to go through it all. So let me outline it at first, a little bit of a preamble, and I'll work through the slides quite quickly, because there's quite a few of them. I think what you'd expect us to have, what we saw in that performance report, is a changing environment. We're seeing things, it's dynamic, there's lots of things changing, and I would argue on top of that, it's not just the threats that's changing, it's the technology that's changing, so our capability to deal with them, the staffing requirements are changing, the complexity of the environment is changing. So one of the things that we need to be able to do in response to that dynamic, sort of environment of crime, is be able to change ourselves. So have an organisation that can adapt and respond to this pattern. And actually, the real trick also is that it's hard to predict. So it's not just actually sort of knowing, there's no clear blueprint for this, although it is called blueprint. There's no clear blueprint. What you've got to be able to do is to see the trends and anticipate what things will look like in the future and make judgments about how that affects the way in which services are delivered. So you'd expect us to have the capability to change, to identify what lies ahead and to turn that into different ways of working. What I like about this in particular, I've been in lots of different organisations, and if I can be blunt, I don't think many organisations do it particularly well, because it's hard. It is hard to do. It's often you're immersed in it, and you can't really make sense of it until afterwards. In hindsight, you can pick out the trends. The things I think that particularly stand out in this model is that it is operationally led. So it is saying that actually what matters first of all is the services we provide to meet the problems, the threats, the issues that are around in the community, and then to build up the support services to help deliver that. Also, what I'm aware of, and what's fairly new to me, is that the machinery to do this is really quite sophisticated. Not only in the way in which the project, the program itself is managed, but also some of the tools that we have. So the modelling software that's available is really quite sophisticated. The other thing I think that's a feature of it is that it feels to me genuinely collaborative. The identification of the strategic direction and the development of the model to address it is something that we work on all together. I mean, Rob and I genuinely do have very regular conversations about this, and the person who leads on change for the police, who's overseeing the programme, is really, really high quality. So I think what we have here is something that's as good as I've seen. I've been around a lot of different organisations, as good as I've seen about managing that process of change. But it's not easy. So if I move on, if this works.
Do you want points of clarification or any questions? Each PowerPoint.
Okay.
As they come along.
Yeah. Or any time.
Basically, it's each PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm just mindful of your timescale, so yeah. So I'm not. I mean, there's quite a few dense slides here, so I'll just pick out some of the themes. What this slide does is say, look, it's really what I've covered already. The context is quite challenging. The context we've seen: rising crime, nobody's pretending otherwise, rising complexity of crime, changing types of crime, and introducing resources. So the context for this is a challenge. It's not straightforward, it's not easy. The force has been through a process, some of which predates me, a process of moving from one model to another. So the model that was, I think, had ended before I came was the Edison model, which, if I characterise it as quite a centralised model. It was, services drawn into the centre and used to deal with issues locally as and when they could be. So it's quite a centralised model. At the point just before I arrived, the Darwin model was introduced. And if I characterise that more broadly, I'm sorry if it's a bit of a crude generalisation, Rob, but that was much more of a devolved model. So what that tried to do is to put more resources into local neighbourhoods and try to merge their different services so they weren't operating in different silos. So I'll move on to the next slide. I won't spend long on that. I think the key word there is evolution. This is something that is constantly developing, and it requires good leadership, it requires good teamwork, and it requires the ability to prioritise areas that particularly want to focus on. Victims and vulnerability are picked out in particular there. Next slide. One of the things that I found baffling in the police world is the number of three-letter abbreviations. Everything's got to have three letters, and they've got to be absolutely impervious to any lay person. And the test for me is, can I tell you what they all are? I think so, but there'll be we'll see as we go through. But I mean, there are that's kind of the machinery of one part of it. That's not everything by any stretch of the imagination. That's policing in neighbourhoods. What you see there is at the very front end, that's where things come in. So CMD, are where the calls come into and how they're dealt with. Within that is a triage process, and the triage process has been developed, as I understand it, has been highly commended by HMIC. And the aim of that is to say, let's not, go through a long-winded process. If we can get eyes on this early on and get this to the right place to deal with, then let's do that. Let's not spend a long time on it. And that's working very well, as I understand it. And I've spent a day in there, by the way. I don't know if you knew that. I spent a day in there actually seeing this, seeing how this works. And it was really quite slick. So that's what the triage process does. The Crime Bureau is developing still. And the Crime Bureau, I think, is an interesting concept that deals with, it says on that slide, it deals with the crime data integrity issues and that sort of area. But it's also becoming a broader concept of dealing with crimes that don't need attendance. So dealing with crimes directly and without necessarily going interviewing the people directly. The bottom layer, the missing persons. One of the things that was interesting for me is how much of this work that comes through here is not directly crime related. Missing persons, I wouldn't say it was a massive bit of the business, but it is a significant part of the business and is regular report. Rob referred to the Monday morning slots we have.
Last year, 4,250 missing people. Divide that down by days. This year, our trend will be over 5,000. So that's 5,000 people getting reported missing that we're having to respond to.
Yep. There is still a specialist response, but the response has been increased. I'm probably covering what's in later slides, so spending a bit more time on here probably helps us get through those quicker. But an enhanced response was built into Darwin from moving on from Edison, so we could get to things quicker, that we could deal with them more speedily, and within that there's an integration here with the neighbourhoods. So response isn't sitting privately on its own; it's working with the local neighbourhood policing. PRT is again a response team, but based in hubs. So again, you can more locally access services. There's a reduced travel time, that sort of thing. The aim is to again integrate that with the local neighbourhood policing and investigation. And yes, sorry. Oh, do I need to turn mine off?
No, that one.
It's okay. Oh, sorry about that. The actual response units. So are we saying, according to the map, we only got now 4 hubs? What about the shires? Does it cover from that area, or is it on a different level of hubs?
Same with the NIU, Neighbourhood Investigation Unit, again linking that more locally with neighbourhood policing, so there's a neighbourhood response to investigation. There still are central investigation resources, but there is a neighbourhood resource as well. And on the right-hand side, you can see the neighbourhood policing, which I assume you're familiar, and it's a model that I personally like a lot. And it's not just about crime investigation or dealing with crime. It's a lot about building confidence. That's where we tend to concentrate the visibility issues on understanding communities, engaging with communities, building confidence. So that's the overall picture. And just jump in when you want to comment, but not you, Rob. I think I've probably covered this. So picking up an incidents early and moving them to the right place. So the triage function, I mean, it gives some figures in there of actually what saving this provides. It does in a sense, generate more resource so we can act quicker. I think it also generates a better service, a quicker service. So that was something introduced by Darwin that's been really effective. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. The process that the investigation take against any incident, whether they're local crimes or other businesses, have we got the category that this will be a priority for this case or that case or anybody to investigate locally on region basis?
Well, I might have to bring Rob in here, but I mean okay, yeah.
They'll look at it depending on what the level of complexity is of the threat. So they'll say what's the most appropriate resource for that. So if it's an ongoing neighbourhood or community-related issue, they might send that direct to the community officer and say this is one you need to pick up. If it's one that requires an immediate response to secure evidence, it might go to response. If it's, let's say, a historic rape, it might well be, well, actually, we're not going to send, there's no forensic evidence, we don't need to secure that now, we'll send a specialist rape investigator. So all it is what's the most appropriate resource to go and deal with that issue, rather than send one, they capture the report, and then they send it down the pipeline.
Sorry, it's just a general question. A lot of this, particularly in terms of the Darwin model, is based on policing from a response perspective. So responding to something in terms of policing in different areas. Is there anything here around prevention? Because I can't see this. So is there a different strand? I would have thought it would be an interface.
Well, shall I have a crack and then you? Yeah, I think so. This particular slide set is more focused on the sort of response initially, but I would say neighbourhood policing has got a key element of prevention in it, and also I would say that the way in which we identify the issues that underpin. So our discussions on the Monday are very much about looking at not just what the level of crimes are, but what are the issues that lie behind it. Mental health issues, for instance, locality issues, and looking at ways in which they can be dealt with. So community impact assessments, we go through every week, what community impact assessments have been done. They're about getting behind what the crime issues are and developing not just responses to that particular incident, but what are the trends, what are the issues that lie behind it. But I've probably not done a proper study.
I think certainly the whole neighbourhood approach is around investigating problem solve with a view of preventing. So certainly locally, all of the neighbourhood teams have gone through quite an in-depth bit of training over the last 12 months, and that's all being linked into an accredited prevent-type problem solving package that's been wrapped around neighbourhoods. We're now going to roll that out across the entire organisation. So the whole organisational culture is all around not just dealing with the here and now, how do you prevent the reoccurrence. So there's a whole backdrop to that. We've also invested in the serious harm reduction unit, which is all around targeting, working with partners, some of the stuff that a lot of crime is very part of peace and crime. Yeah. So I think there's a lot going on, and it's evolving. So when Paul comes on to where we are now and where we're heading around the blueprint bit, so Darwin started us off on a journey. We're at a point now where there's a number of work streams, and the future, we're just doing this together at the moment, is the future operating model. There's an even greater weighting and emphasis being placed on prevention, problem solving, etc.
Actually, if you're okay, Chair, I will move on to that more quickly, because I suspect people will want to see where's it going, more than where are we now. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Could I suggest, Rob, that when you're talking, you go on the microphone, and then those at home or in Cornwall will be able to see you. And I'm sure Cornwall will want to see you. Lord, perhaps you'd like to join us as well, so you're close to a microphone, and then we can incorporate you at the appropriate time as well.
I'll try and keep quiet.
So I'm gonna move quickly through these slides. So this is the Darwin model I'm talking about now, and I think the key thing on each of the following slides is the last bullet is a but. So this will say to you that this is where we've got to. These are improvements. So priority response I've already talked about, but it needs further development. In this case, we've done a lot of changes to the response service, but it's, demand has outpaced us. The demand is increasing, and so we need to think again. We need to do more work on that. So that's the but bit on the end. So if I go through each one, just say the but, and then we'll move into the blueprint. The next one is about investigation. I've already talked about the basing of neighbourhood investigation teams. A lot of that, the co-location, the shared intelligence, they're key developments in Darwin. But again, it hadn't picked up predictive demand. There are future pressures, and there is increasing complexity that means we need to rethink and move on. Same with the missing persons. Less so here, but there has been improved performance, improved sharing of information. I think improved ability, coming back to your point earlier, not just where's this missing person, can we find them, but what are the issues? So we've had a few mental health missing person issues. We've had quite a few children missing persons from children's homes. So the key challenge is not to just go and find that person, but to work out strategies with the mental health unit, with the children's homes. How can we prevent this? What strategies can we take so this doesn't happen again? Because many of these people are repeat ones. But again, the demand has increased, is increasing higher than anticipated. The priority response inspectors, we have now put dedicated, so change from Edison into Darwin has involved putting dedicated inspectors into custody and managing that, so they've got more sort of local knowledge, they understand the environment and manage it more effectively. And we have a duty rota of chief inspectors who deal with the other issues that were often distracting them. There is a bit of extra specialised, hopefully I've got that right, Rob. But, yeah. And as far as I'm aware, there's no plan to change this, and that pattern seems to me to work well, including our own, the own chief inspector who's within our office, who does retain this responsibility, who is regularly called out on a rota to deal with this. The next slide is crime data integrity, and let's be upfront about this. This wasn't great. Our recording on crime data integrity wasn't brilliant. We had to do a lot of work, and the police have put a lot of resource into this. It has pulled it up, but still needs more work on to ensure that we're recording the right stuff. The standards are very, very rigorous and demands an awful lot of work, and we're still assessing what the actual resources required are. But crime data integrity is a key driver, and getting it right is important. So what you see from this is that Darwin, I think you can't ever stand still. You can't just sit and wait and say, oh, we've got the finished version here, because there's no finished version. It's a changing picture. So what I've tried to pick out is the way in which Darwin moved us on from the previous Edison model, gave us better capability, but it isn't capable to deal with the trends that we're picking up. And those trends are complexity, those trends are demand, those trends are to do with the nature of our workforce and how we're able to respond. So what you'll see now is how we're moving forward, how we're taking this on so that we are able to deal with the reduction in resources, the increase in demand and the increase in complexity and changing nature of the threats, which is called Blueprint. Everyone calls it Blueprint. I know why we called it Blueprint, but there we are. It's called Blueprint, and it's emerging now. I won't go through that in particular. What I'd just pick out from that is I already said that some of the tools we have are really quite impressive. I'm particularly impressed with the process evolution modelling toolkit. No toolkit's perfect. It relies on the data that you put in to get a good picture. But what this can do is to say, well, if we put this amount of resource into our response service, and these are the parameters that we're working with, we've got a response time of X, we've got a demand of Y, this is the sort of resource that you need to put in. That's the sort of thing that process evolution software can do. Next slide focuses on the policing vision. And so there is a policing vision, a nationally developed policing vision. It's very easy. I'd recommend people read it. It's a very simple vision. It's very accessible, and it does provide a kind of vision. It's not a complex vision. It does provide a vision of the way in which policing will go over the next 10, 20 years. 10 years, overdoing it. And one of the key themes of that is the better use of technology, using a lot of extra digital services, more effective digital services to enhance our offer. And that is something that's very definitely in the blueprint, how we maximise that. So you will see over the course of, actually in some cases, the next few months, the use of digital services as well as traditional services. So being able to report a crime online will become one of the issues that we introduce over time. So those are the general patterns in which we'll be moving forward. This is often about juggling three things, and the three things that we are trying to juggle are, what are the resources that we have available, what is the demand that is coming in through the door, and what's our capability to deal with it, and what performance standards do we need to achieve. Those are the sorts of things that can be fed into the process modelling software that I told you about, and give you some information that helps you to understand it. But that's generally what we're doing. We're trying to work out what resources we have, what performance we need to hit, and how many numbers we're dealing with. And as we've seen, the numbers are going up. The demand is increasing. This pretty much says the same thing, so I won't dwell on this slide, but it's the same sort of thing. Managing that decreasing resource and increasing demand is a challenging thing to do, so there's no disguising that. And this, lays it out more firmly. I mean, you've got the slide set, so I won't go through it. Just mindful of time, but just reflecting that we can't do everything, and we need to make some choices, and we need to make some decisions about how things are done. And some of those may change the way in which services have traditionally been delivered. So, for instance, being able to report, as I've said, report a crime online instead of reporting a crime through the traditional route of making a phone call. Having it dealt with remotely instead of having somebody always come to the door and deal with it. Those sorts of things are things that we have to explore if we're to manage this process. The next slide brings that out even more, and if I just explain that, one of the key drivers, one of the key approaches that we're adopting in this, and I think this is really quite impressive. This is more Andy's development than anything, as far as I can see, is actually one of the ways in which we could do this better and more efficiently and provide a better service is to do things right at the first point of contact. So I listened to a call made to a 999 call so I listened to the call yesterday and heard the operator talking the person through the issues, ensuring that he was safe, getting him into a safe place, dealing with it on the phone. I mean, that must be quite unusual, I suspect, but it was really quite impressive how the call taker managed the process. And in the end, this didn't, it may or may not have needed, but didn't have a blue light car rushing out there. The issue was dealt with almost on the phone. That's probably rare, and I'm not saying that would often happen, but it's an example of picking up on issues and dealing with them as well as you can at the first point of contact, wherever possible. The example I always give of this is whenever I call Sky for them to come out and fix my Wi-Fi, I then spend the next hour on the phone to somebody who's telling me that I need to change the channel and turn up this, tune this and that, and if I'm honest, that irritates me a little bit. But nevertheless, the point is that it's far more effective to deal with it in that first phone call than it is to send an engineer around and wait 2 weeks for them to come and make sure you're in and all that sort of thing. So that's kind of the theme of that. That will be challenging to do, to put more resource into the front end and make sure that people have the capability to deal with it at the front end. And it culturally will be quite challenging, I suspect, for the police. But that's the direction of travel. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
No, I guess the only thing I've got to say is there's the front end coming in via the contact centre, and then there's the online competent. Sorry, Chair. There's the bit about the contact management and how we manage that flow and what the call takers are trained to do and can do. And then I think there's the whole bit about what is an omnicompetent response and trying to resolve it rather than take a report and hand it on to another unit. So there's a shift around trying to put more into early resolution at the point of contact, but actually I think the next layer within that front end is greater omnicompetence of the person who turns up, that can just deal with it and deal with it to the satisfaction of the person who's reported it, rather than I'm going to do this, somebody will contact you in a week. We're going to try and move away from that if we can.
And that is what the next slide shows. So the next slide is about, I would say two things. One is this is locally based, so it's ensuring that the officers have the capability to do a range of different tasks. They have generic capabilities, and they can respond flexibly as and when required. So you can see there, I mean, I envisage this as a balloon. If you squeeze one bit of the balloon, it bulges somewhere else. If you squeeze it somewhere, in another part, it bulges another part. You've only got one balloon, and hopefully it won't pop. That's not a good analogy from that point of view. But the idea is that you can shift it and shape it depending on what the demands are. I think the trick here, though, is, I mean, you raised the issue about response. The danger is response is immediate, it's demanding, it's in your face. Will we always have the balloon bulging in the response direction? I think our job is to make sure it bulges, differently, as we put the right amount of resource into the more proactive, the more long-term services. But that's the idea that Rob said: omnicompetence, locally based, people that can deal with all sorts of things. And that just shows that policing in neighbourhoods model that we have. All of the services located, with some specialist services sitting behind. I'm not saying all services, but specialist services we've not focused on here, but as much service as we can based in the local neighbourhood with omnicompetent staff dealing with it. I won't go through that, I'm just mindful of time, and that's a very dense slide to work through. The waterfall principle is simply saying we work through the system as it is experienced by the user. So, the call intake comes first, and then the move to neighbourhood, and then the more specialist responses, and that's the way we're developing it. And that's it. Sorry, that was longer than I thought, so I've tried to go through it as quickly as I could.
And before Deborah asks questions, you mentioned moving on. Please don't think the meeting has to finish at 3. We have a very able vice chair. It's just I'm leaving at 3, and that's all. Deborah.
Just about going forward in digital technology, is there any way anyone can report a crime online at a police station? Is there any forward-facing, and also web chat? Is that something that you're considering as well?
I'm smiling because actually that's exactly so. Where I think we need to go, if I put the context of it, currently the main routes into the police are 909, 101. We have now got an online facility where you can report crime. The take-up is improving. We need that to improve quite significantly. The reason for that is, if you look at time and cost, to be able to maintain the increase in demand that is coming in the front end, if everybody was to do it on the phone, we'd need to increase our call takers quite a lot. And actually, that's where would you get that money from? Where would you get the resource from? It would come from elsewhere. So what we're going to have to do is quite a proactive way of trying to get people to channel shift onto online, to incentivise people to go online. So certainly that's the focus at the minute. And the areas about retail crime, for example, and things like Bilkins. Bilkins and retail crime account to 10% of our crime. So actually, if you start to look at, is there a way that we can provide a facility for business community to report? I'm not talking about when the shoplifters are in the shop, but when they're reporting, on Tuesday afternoon somebody came in. Well, if they can go online, it's more efficient, and I'd rather have that resource doing the problem solving around the offenders. So definitely we're going to try to channel shift and nudge people onto that. There's definitely technology around effectively FaceTime and web chat, and certainly we are looking to take some of our front inquiry offices and turn them into service centres. And we're in the process at the minute of looking at effectively glorified iPads and computers on stands that as you walk into a service centre, and then there's a whole debate about, it's a bit like when you get to the bank, isn't it? The bank's shut, but you can still walk in, you're still in a room, you can still access the cash point. Same principle with our front inquiries. Could we provide a facility where you can go into there, use it, and we'll do a bit like the supermarkets, we'll provide staff to support people initially, and as people get bought into it. So we're looking at all 3 of those.
saw Rutland then, Melissa, second. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Based on following what Deborah just asked the question, is there any way we can create apps and that way that we can report straight down to the, like City Council have, report any incident or any type of issues. We download the apps automatically, everything's there apart from the context of the incident.
It's certainly being factored in terms of that and how that. We want to optimise as much of that technology to get people to self-serve that we can because it's more efficient. It's £120 per transaction for us to send somebody in person. It's between £30 and £50 if we do it on the phone with that time. If we can get people to self-serve, it's from anything from 50p to £3. So, from a cost perspective, it's the right way. We've got to move that direction.
I mean, it's an impressive blueprint to try and deal with what's happening. Policing, effective policing is going to get really difficult with resources being constrained. And however much, you can look at kind of digitalizing, it doesn't take place. It can't replace an officer coming to a door and giving that sort of reassurance. So I think, for me, there is a question here, and I understand it's going to be a real culture shift for the police itself. I'm more worried about the public in terms of public confidence, because there's a real culture shift in the way they are going to be experiencing policing going forward, particularly for certain crimes, in a sense. And I'm just wondering what's happening in relation to that, that aspect around not only communicating with the public, and I know this is very early on and you need the funding to come through and everything, but actually that's the level of transparency which I can see, well, actually, for these crimes, this is going to be online, and this is what you expect, and for these crimes, this is what you expect. I mean, I've got a second question as well. And this is very much around, actually, not only, for me, crime doesn't take place in a vacuum. And I think the PCC put it around that there are certain reasons around austerity. The other one, let's be honest, we are very individualistic, and if somebody's got something better I want it, it's this whole culture about I want something more expensive, much better. And I'm just wondering, in this blueprint, in terms of going forward, and you may have this elsewhere, is this bit around working together, not only with local neighbourhoods, but actually with other agencies, that whole collaborative thing, particularly around the councils, but health, all of those aspects, that is going to really help in terms of effective policing going forward if we're never going to get any resources.
Well, the first one I absolutely agree with, and it's one of the themes we didn't bring out in here is the way in which the blueprint is being designed is to ensure that every aspect of the operating model can interact and link with another agency, and that's happening now in terms of the development of digital services. So straight away now, I think this is available now, that if you go on to report something, it will it will lead you. Let's say it's a fly tipping issue, which is the responsibility of the local authority. I hope I've got that right. That then you will be redirected to the local authority site. So the aim is to ensure that we're linked up. And in terms of consultation, what sits behind this and the various service offers that we're defining, so we haven't talked about that, but we're trying to define exactly what we mean by the service offer. What can the public expect? What sits behind that is a lot of consultation. These are public services, so the public needs to be able, through the PCC, needs to be able to have its voice to explain what it actually wants from the service. So that consultation it hasn't kicked off yet, but will kick off. The most immediate example will be the service offer. But have I missed anything out there, Rob?
No, I think it's superb. I guess the budget announcement is going to be probably the catalyst of what. So I think certainly from a technological point of view, I'm confident that we've got the foundations in. There's a lot that we're also doing around how we can link that up with the criminal justice system. But certainly the foundations are there now. So the business process, the technology is in place. The public support probably needs a bit of work. And I get a sense that probably once we know what the budget announcement is, I think there is a really robust sort of engagement. The difficulty with this is what the public would like and what can be afforded. I think there's a gap, and it's how we navigate our way through that and then provide a service offer which is going to meet their requirements. So Paul alluded to a service offer. We are going through the business at the moment, and Jason Masters is leading on this for us, which is what is the service offer that we currently give, what can we do, what could we afford to do, so at least when we have those conversations with the public we're a little bit more informed.
Okay, members, I don't think there's any more questions at all. Just ask you all to note the report, Darwin. Always very appropriately named. I don't know who came up with that one, but got it smack on. Yeah. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 7, hate crime, pages 29 to 34. I have to find it myself first of all.
Right.
There we are. Sergeant Nick Woodrow wrote the report. Is this Sergeant Nick?
Simon Down from my office,
course,
senior member of my staff,
Yep.
who's going to talk to this report briefly.
Okay.
Your
Are you going to
permission,
make a
Chair.
small presentation first? I mean,
Yes.
introduction, really?
Just a short introduction, if that's okay.
Yep.
Not from me. Not
No,
from me. I'm going to
straight
pass
over.
on to Simon.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'd just like to start, if I may, Chair, with just sharing a definition of hate crime. It's not within the report itself, but I think it will just help to frame the paper and any discussion that we may have. So the definition of hate crime is defined as any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice towards someone based on a personal characteristic. So that was agreed between the Home Office and wider criminal justice agencies back in 2007. So we've already covered it briefly within the performance report, but just to highlight that so hate crime has risen 20% between 2016-17 and 17-18, and so far this financial year we've had 805 hate incidents, so it would appear to be continuing to rise.
These are reported.
Reports, yeah. So obviously a number of items were covered within the PCC's police and crime plan around hate crime, and he set out that he would deliver better journey cards. So those have been launched, and they help disabled people to travel more easily. So that's more of a preventative measure. There was the sports club hate crime advert, which was actually launched last year successfully, and is continuing being used within schools. We have the, I'll skip to point 17, go back slightly back to front. The hate crime information card has also been delivered. And then we also have the hate crime perpetrator programme. So this is something which is still under development. We've done a lot of work with Leicester University to understand both what is currently out there in terms of both across the UK and further afield, and also gaining a deeper and richer understanding of who are hate crime victims and perpetrators across the area. So what has particularly come out of that is that, as you'd expect, there's a range of perpetrators, but particularly on the younger scale of things. So 14-year-olds came out, I think, was at the median age for hate crime perpetrators. So obviously we need to take a very careful and measured approach to that. You know, we need to be careful of criminalising young people, so on and so forth, but that is something that we are working on still. Worth also highlighting the work that Victim First do around hate crime victims. Obviously, as you'd expect, they'll be supporting those victims, but they've also supported the force in helping to identify victims of hate crime where perhaps the fact that hate crime has been, or the fact that hate has been a contributing factor to that crime might not have been initially picked up or recorded. Victim First have been able to pick that up with the victim and help feed that back to the force to improve that, both that reporting and also clearly how that case is dealt with. Final thing I'd like to say is just to highlight that the National Hate Crime Awareness Week is shortly upon us. Obviously, the PCC will be joining with his wider colleagues across the country for the No to Hate campaign, or hashtag No to Hate, I should say, campaign. So that will be posting a short message online, and then obviously daily tweets, keeping the social media presence up around that area and getting involved in any local activities. So that's all I've got to say on that. Any questions?
Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much. Fairly strong paper. Number of questions coming. I'm sure Berenice is going to be first, and then Rutland.
Okay, thank you very much for the paper. Can I just kind of clarify? I mean, there are a couple of obviously initiatives that you're taking in terms of hate crime, and you're working collaboratively with all the organisations that you need to. The two things that I just have kind of want to clarify in my mind. One is around the CPS and their response, which, I mean, it's quite shocking actually. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the PCC, what influence are you using to ensure that the CPS actually follows through in relation to hate crime? Because it sounds like you're still seeing hostility in the reports as well that come through. So, what are the reasons that they seem to be hesitant in terms of pursuing cases?
That's one probably for the CPS to answer. I think the CPS may not work on exactly the same criteria as the police do on this. They have their role. They're aware of hate crime. Maybe their definition is slightly different, and their view as to whether they get a conviction or not. They've got obviously anyone who's charged and brought before the court. There's the two tests. Public interest test is the main one, and obviously the evidential test is the other one. But honestly, I mean, I try and answer most questions, but I cannot speak for the Crown Prosecution Service.
What we can do, Berenice, is we can write to the CPS and ask those questions.
I mean, I think they're not even applying the Director of Public Prosecution standards. I think that's where I was coming from. So it would be really helpful to get a response from them, and I understand that you can't. I think the question I was asking is, are you exerting any influence to have that discussion?
I certainly am in my capacity as chair of the East Midlands Regional Criminal Justice Board. That's a position I've just taken up, and there'll be a question that... What is your real complaint about the CPS?
Well, I mean, I suppose you can be really effective in terms of policing hate crime. You can look at kind of prevention. But sometimes it's about messaging. So, if the CPS is not going to take forward any cases or are reluctant in taking forward any cases, what reassurance can you give victims, in a sense? And what message do you send to possible, perpetrators in the future?
Well, I know what they'll say. They'll say that they test each case by the standards that they're obliged to, and this is the consequence of it. But I think it is certainly worth bringing up. I think Rob wants to say what.
To give you some reassurance, I know there are conversations taking place. We have a regular meeting with CPS, so we've got a DCI that will be linked in to look at this. What they might say is it's not going to add any weight to the sentencing, so it depends on what the level of the charge is and whether they think by adding it it's going to get a guilty plea or a not guilty plea and what the outcome is. So I get a sense there's probably something here around the negotiation that's taking place at court. So let's say, for example, it's an affray and the outcome is going to be X sentence. It may be that they're prepared to plead to that, but they're not prepared to plead to it if it's got a racially aggravated bit, and therefore it would go to trial. I think there's an appetite, certainly for the CPS, to challenge some of that and go to trial with some of it, and certainly that's what I'm picking up. But I sense it's traded off.
Is it on this issue, Keith? Yeah, okay.
But I think also, as was pointed out with the hate crime perpetrator programme and the research, if the medium age is 14 years, there's a real issue here that we don't want to criminalise what are really very young people, because that's the medium age. Some must be very young, below the age of presumably criminal responsibility.
Well, thank goodness there are other ways of dealing with something like hate crime other than charging and bringing to court. That is necessary in many cases, but in many cases it's not the answer, which is what the perpetrator programme is all about.
I have Ratlal next. Abdul, do you have a question as well?
I just wanted to follow up the point that was made about whether we write into the CPS, and I think that might be, I'll second that to be able to do that, Chair.
That will happen. Ratlal.
Thank you, Chair. Simon, you said you work with the university and the other victim first. What about the grassroots level where the problems are, especially the youth, the clubs, after-school clubs, anything like that? Because that's where the actual hate issues start sometime. Are we sponsoring those kind of a project? Are we helping those projects, or are we working with those kind of organization?
So I guess there's almost two sides to that, really. In terms of our work around the hate crime perpetrator program itself, thus far we've wanted to try and keep that engagement with the university at this point. I think as we move into that phase of actually developing something, I think that is the point at which we're going to be engaging with those wider organisations in terms of that specific perpetrator programme. More broadly, I think there are things that we do around, so the PCC grants in terms of funding of provision for young people. I'm sure that some of that will be picked up through that provision.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be interested in under what categories all these hate crimes have been logged under, and are we picking up any themes, and what work are we doing to, once we've got a theme, to try and help that, please?
So in terms of the research on the university, so there was quite a reasonable spread. I think faith-based and race-based was the highest, but there was still a reasonable representation of other types of hate crime. It wasn't just all one sort. And equally, evidence that perpetrators, it's not just white British males. It is a much wider group of perpetrators. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything on that.
Maronisa?
Just a quick one. Obviously, the research with the university, is that been published? Has that been published? And is there any way we can have a copy of that, or is that confidential?
I can't see. It's ongoing. So the piece of work is ongoing, but we have had a couple of reports from the university. I'd have to double check, but I can't see why we couldn't share them with the panel, certainly.
Kirk?
Yes. Sorry, Chair, just on the stats, because Abdul asked a similar question. I did find a paper that was sent to me recently with some stats on it, and the kind of hate crime categories are broken down to racial, religion and faith, sexual orientation, disability, transgender, alternative subculture. Too sure what that is. And
that's goths.
And there's only one in a 12-month period of those. And for the racially aggravated, they're broken down on a month-by-month basis. I'll just give you the highest is 86 in any one month, which was September 2017, and the lowest seems to be 44, which was March 2018. For religion and faith, it seems to be 22 was the highest in any one month, June 2017, and 5 December 17 was 5 for religion and faith. Sexual orientation, the highest was 11, the lowest was 3. Disability, the highest in a month these all are, was 7, and the lowest has been 0. Transgender, the highest has been 2, and the lowest obviously 0. So they're quite broad, the stats are, but I'm sure they'll be in that report, and we can get those. These are police stats as well, by the way. So the report that Abdul asked for, I don't think will be a problem.
Maronisa?
I think what would be really helpful in terms of data, data is really good to kind of pick up themes, is to also break it down by age. So, where you talk about perpetrators being 14-year-olds at median age, and it's not all 14-year-olds that commit it, I suspect it's the hate crime is against a younger person as well at that point. So it'd be really interesting in terms of the future, looking at hate crime and how policing and how we police that, but also how education, it would be really important in terms of how it's integrated into curricula, is to look at kind of age, but also gender, interestingly, I think, because women are less likely to report as well. So it'd be really useful if there was a way of kind of disaggregating some of that.
My feeling is that women are more likely to be the victims of hate crime. I think Muslim women particularly, in the course of the last year and a half, have been very much the subject of hate incidents, if not hate crimes, which they obviously in large numbers have not reported. So I very much take the point you make.
Okay, members. We normally go through each section as it comes, but you've been a little bit all over the paper here. So are there any other questions at all on the whole paper? I take it that's a no, you're exhausted on this particular matter, yeah? Deborah.
Just come back on my point. I think for me, especially if that data that's in under performance under 2, what the hate crimes that have been reported, if we can have the breakdown of that sent out to us.
Absolutely do our best to do that, yep.
Okay, members, although there was no recommendation, I still ask you to note the report. All okay? Thank you very much, members. Moving on to agenda item 8, what I find a particularly strong paper here, recruitment and retention in Leicestershire Police, improving diversity in Black, Asian and minority ethnic community. Lord Buck.
I'm going to introduce Lynn Woodward, the Head of Equality and Human Rights at Leicestershire Police, to you now, whose report this is, paper this is. Just preface what she's going to say by saying this will embarrass her, but she's an extremely, extremely distinguished quality officer with a very high reputation outside the police as well as within the police. And I think the police are extraordinarily lucky to have her. You'll form your own judgment, of course, when you've heard her. With that, Lynn, and I could say that at the very end of this, as she talks about the new recruitment, which may just be part of what she has to say, maybe not the main part, you may just be able to detect, for almost the first time since I've taken this job, a slight disagreement around that issue. But wait and see. Lynn.
First of all, welcome, Lynn. But I'm going to take this opportunity just to remind people that I suspect this will go beyond a quarter of an hour, this paper. So I will be leaving at 3. I've got a meeting at 4 o'clock at Milton, which I really have to be. And then, interesting enough, and all the papers we've had tonight are going to see Millwall tonight at Nottingham. So there's quite an interesting contrast.
I won't describe you as a glutton for punishment, Chairman. Suspiciously close to it,
I remain faithful. So, welcome, Lynn. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Obviously, you can see the paper in front of you, and I wasn't intending to go through everything page by page, but maybe highlight some key points and then take questions. So this clearly gives an outline of some of the work that we've been doing, both in the Diversity and Inclusion Unit and in recruitment in HR at Leicestershire Police. Obviously, we've not recruited for many years, and we opened our doors last year for the first time for a long time. And what this paper does is outline 3 of our campaigns, taking us up to the most current campaign. So campaign 1 was between May and June 2017, and this can be seen at point 4 in the background. Campaign 2 between November 2017 and January 2018, and campaign 3 between April and June this year. What we've managed to do within my unit, the Diversity and Inclusion Unit, is appoint 2 positive action officers. So we've got Karolina Zalewska, who came to us in September last year, so she's just clocked a year with us. And then as a result of the increase in the council precept, we got our 2nd positive action officer, who started with us in June. And their role really is to increase the recruitment, retention and progression of all underrepresented groups. So we don't just concentrate on the Black minority ethnic communities, we actually look at all of our underrepresented groups. It was really clear after stage 1 of our recruitment, or our campaign 1 of our recruitment, you can see the stats, that we weren't really attracting a huge percentage in terms of black and minority ethnic communities. Although we were recruiting, or we were attracting, a fairly robust female representation and disability representation. So as a result of that, we kind of looked at the way we were doing it. We looked at some of the positive action initiatives we were doing. We changed our media campaign. We did role profiles, make a difference role models. We did web chats. We did positive action seminars. And when you then look at the results at November 2017 to January 2018, the second table, which is on page 38, you can begin to see that we're having a lot more success. What we did discover was one of the big dropouts for us of all candidates who are from underrepresented backgrounds was the competency-based questionnaire, which is an online questionnaire that you fill in that automatically gets assessed. So as a result of that, we removed that for campaign 3 and introduced a telephone interview, and that's had an incredible success rate in terms of candidates getting through that process. And if you look at page 40 at point 29, you can see that actually for campaign 3 we've probably got the best figures we've ever had in terms of attracting people and also getting through the process. What I would say is, as you can see in the second box, it says current live applications, because at the moment they've not yet gone through the search process, which is the write-in assessment process. And that's partly because it's been a sustained, lengthy campaign, because we've done telephone interviews. And as you can imagine, there's a huge difference between each candidate being telephoned and interviewed, as opposed to them filling an online questionnaire and it being all assessed remotely. So that's actually elongated our process. So those are the sort of recruitment campaigns. I then briefly wanted to talk to you about the apprenticeship scheme, because Moji Brown, who is our second positive action officer, is very much concentrating on attracting young people to go on to our PC degree apprenticeship scheme. So we've already had our first cohort. There were 20 that started a couple of weeks ago. The chief welcomed them into the force, and obviously they're starting studying at the university. We are opening our doors on the 1st of November for a further 20 vacancies, and what we're trying to do is very much target all of our activity at the moment at underrepresented groups. So we're trying to attract a high percentage of members of the community from the black and minority ethnic community. We're trying to attract more LGBT young people, more disabled young people, and more women. The proof will be at the end of November, when we close our applications, as to how many of those we're attracting. What we do know at the moment, we've got 100 people who've registered an interest, and 25% of those are from a black and minority ethnic background, and over 50% of them are female. So we know that the targeted campaigns are working. The police degree apprenticeship scheme is a fantastic offer for young people, because effectively what they're going to get is a degree paid for by Leicestershire Police. They're going to be paid for the 3 years, and they're going to be guaranteed a job at the end of it. So that's a pretty amazing offer, because the other routes into policing going forward will be either a degree in policing, which will be self-funded by individual candidates, or a degree in another discipline, and then you will do a conversion course. So those will be, come 2020, 1920, isn't it? 2020, the new routes into policing. So the degree apprenticeship is an absolutely amazing offer. And with that, I'll ask if you've got any questions, really.
Yeah, I'll just go first. We will go through each section as it comes, but just general questions though. The apprenticeship schemes, get those lucky enough, yeah. Do you say it's a 3-year course?
Yes.
You did, yeah.
Yeah.
So what guarantee? You've invested virtually £60,000, a lot of effort into it on top of that. Do they have to sign up at that point, or can they walk away?
There is a possibility that they could walk away. There is a possibility that they could walk away. there is no absolute tie-in to them being a police officer, because even if we tied them into being a police officer, you could resign. You can't stop somebody resigning from the end of a process.
So no contract of intent or whatever? No. Okay, and then something else I did hear someone else say, I can't remember who it was, but again, well done to those guys who signed up and lucky enough to be selected. But being 67 in November, I come back, I remember the old village copper, of course, and of course they had what I call schnout. Maybe not the most accomplished when it came to filling in forms. Will you be able to capture those people as well?
They need to go through the degree process. That will be the new route in. And there's a lot of controversy about it. There is an awful lot of controversy about it. There are a lot of people who don't agree with that. But if that's what, at the end of the day, is brought in, that will be the only way into the police service. So either you will join us as an apprentice and we will take you through a degree with a lot of support, or you will already have a degree.
There's no sensitivity that you are maybe missing out that good basic copper sense?
I hate to say this and actually say that this is not my scheme. This is a national scheme. I don't know if Rob wants to.
It feels slightly unfair because obviously we've all got our own views. I've got some fairly strong views on it. This is something which is being driven nationally, and this is the way that policing is going, and it's about that sort of level of professional sort of qualification is what ultimately they're after. I'm sure we've all got some views that we could have a conversation of it. You cannot ever underestimate common sense, good communication skills and problem solving, and not all of that is always aligned to academic achievement. So somewhere in there what we're looking for is people that have got the intellect and ability to get the degree, that have also got that common sense, good communication skills and can actually relate to people. The trick here is to align our recruitment process to make sure we get the right candidates.
Apologies, Lynn, if I thought I was getting personal towards you. I wasn't, but anyway, item 8. We're going to move on. We have page 35, nothing on the purpose report. Deborah?
Just a quick comment on the apprenticeship. I find it really encouraging that this is there for another alternative for people, and would appreciate an update at some point in the future as to how it's going. Come back to us.
No problem.
Now, I have Abdul and Rutland. Can we pick it up in the various sections rather than go all over the paper? Or is it just general questions? General few, is it, Abdul? Let's get you first then, Abdul.
Yeah, it's general. I think it's quite a good campaign, if anything, at this stage, and it's quite positive, in terms of what's been achieved so far. And I'm very, very impressed in terms of the events that you've managed and the organisations you've attended, and obviously envisage the numbers to be increased. Just in terms of the community police officers that we have currently, I know I've seen in the area which I represent, is quite a few from the minority communities. Are they being given the opportunity to be able to apply to become full police officers, and would they be able to take into account?
Yes.
The second one is FE or HE in terms of attending students. We have a large minority and diverse population of students in Leicester, and take advantage of that. Are we doing anything in that area as well?
Yes, on both counts. So very much in terms of our police community support officers, the very first intake that we took was predominantly from police community support officers. And so we did an internal recruitment campaign to encourage our own police staff, our own volunteers, members of the Special Constabulary and police community support officers. In terms of the university, my positive action officers are spending all of their time engaging with students and doing outreach work with students, as well as colleges, schools, places of further education in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland.
Rationale, can it be picked up in the sections or is general?
It's the general point. Thank you, Chair. Lynn, in your stage 1, 15.42%, that includes, I assume that includes a white candidates as well for recruitment, yeah? Yeah, but My question really, it is, because BME is my passion, equality is my passion, and the number of recruitment in that process is still pretty low. The campaign around the BME, whether it is a language barrier or whatever you like to call it, there is pretty low campaign going on. While I accept, Chief and the other senior management team has gone on to social media and giving a message out, we often tweet on the campaign as well. But there is still very low campaign about the recruitment process of BME background. How are we going around, or how are we going to take a positive action to recruit? I mean, it's not just the police force here, but it is in general, at the other frontline services, there is lacking of BME recruitment process.
In some ways, I'm a little surprised you said that, actually, because the positive action officers have done extensive outreach work in places of worship, in colleges, in schools. They've gone to things like the Caribbean Carnival. They've been seen with a high presence at Pride, engaging with the BME community who identify themselves as LGBT+. And so in some ways I'm a little surprised that you're saying it's very low. It's not as high as we would like it to be, but there's certainly, the positive action officers are out 80% of the time engaging with different communities. So I give you an example. I attended the Sri Hindu temple last week, where we had a faith forum. There were about 25 people there. One of my positive action officers was with me, and we talked about the recruitment process. So if there's anywhere in particular that you think that we're not reaching, please let me know. We're open to any
That is where I'm trying to come on. You had a multi-faith meeting last week, and I accept that, yeah. As far as the ward council are concerned, or the neighbouring council, they are not aware of it. So we, as working in a partnership, we can't get a message across to the grassroots active members or community. I think that's where the failures are. If we work in a partnership with local council, irrespective of what they are from, I think that would assist you helping more recruitment more and getting more message out on the road.
Thank you for that. And what we'll ensure is that we actually link in with the councillors and link in with the campaigns when we're in your area or when we're in the neighbouring areas, so that hopefully you can promote the events that we're going to. I thought that you may have picked up some of the stuff that we've been involved in, so I apologise for that.
Okay, Lord Berkshire's going to come in here, and then it's over to Melanisa.
Chair, I know you're off to the delights of Melton and the City Ground, but what I just want to say is that before you go, I will come in a bit later after all the questions, is that the two questions you asked around recruitment seem to me to be precisely the right questions to ask, and I'm going to be saying something on those lines after you've gone, which is why I wanted to just tell you that.
Thank you for that. I'll say my goodbyes. I'm sure you'll all be waiting at 10 to 10 to see the result, so the best side will win. Hand you over to Michael.
I'll do my best to deputise for Councillor Orson, who's just on his way. I think Melanisa, you're next.
Okay. Can I just say, it's a really good report and well done. I mean, it's quite impressive. What was really interesting here was the difference between the campaigns, and I think the success in terms of underrepresentation groups when we talk about BME, LGBT, and people with disabilities as well. I mean, great, was around campaign 2, which I thought was a lot more intensive from an outreach model. So it shows that you can engage, but you need to do a lot more of that engagement, which it can be resource intensive, so well done. The only other thing that I would really like to ask is, when you've got the BME data, you say including white other, what is the actual number? What's the actual percentage? So I can work that out from here. I think it'd be really helpful in future reports to have that separate, if that's okay.
Yeah, I will absolutely bring that back. I couldn't tell you off the cuff. I don't hold that kind of figures in my head. But obviously, yeah, I will bring that back.
The only other thing I had was around the apprenticeship that you're kind of doing, the two cohorts that you've got. So the first cohort's already going through. What's the diversity makeup in relation to that? Do we know? I mean...
I don't know precisely, but the diversity makeup isn't fantastic in terms of black, minority, ethnic. And that's partly because the cohort of apprentices were gained from campaign 1. And so actually the black and minority ethnic representation from campaign 1 was, as you can see, 4.65%. And they were the group that we actually gained the first 20 apprentices. So they weren't a standalone recruitment process because it came upon us really, really quickly. And we were one of the first forces in the country to go with that.
And the apprenticeship scheme, in terms of the funding for that, is that coming nationally as well? Because you've got two cohorts going through, isn't it? Or is it being funded?
So there's a top slice. So
There
the money
is-
comes off the force and then it's
So
come back.
it's
So if we didn't...
it's your
so
money.
It's our money. If we effectively didn't do an apprenticeship scheme, we lose the money. So they've taken our money and said, you will spend it in this way. So
Right.
what we've done is we've aligned the apprenticeship scheme to give us an opportunity to bring people in that hadn't got the degree route. So very much a focus on that. What I would say is, so in terms of the ethnicity of those that have come through from cohort 1, we currently have not got a pool of officers that are waiting to join. So we are now, the opportunity is to really influence it. Where with cohort 1, I think there was people that were still going through the process. So I think we're very hopeful that actually we should start to see a bit of a shift on that around some of the ethnicity.
My final kind of is just a comment, sorry, and I've taken a lot more time, but apprenticeship is kind of the way forward for a lot of professions, if you look at it. So I know it's top slice money, it's your money coming back and you've got to do it. It's a really good offer, I must say. You know, I mean, in terms of for a young person who probably doesn't even know what they want to do in the future. I'm just wondering, given the fact that it's only being funded for the two cohorts, going forward, it may not be the only way, but national policies that you have to have the degree to get into the police, is that apprenticeship model, there is national funding, isn't it, that people do tap into? Is this something the police is thinking about, or locally are we thinking about that you could continue that?
I think it's one of those that we want to get it in and make sure it's working. And then obviously then there's the option. So at the moment I would say that we've got, the ratio is effectively, it's 1 in 5 will come through the apprenticeship route, 4 being that they'll either come through the, I've got a degree, I'm going to do a conversion, or they're coming in on some other sort of direct entry or fast track type route. My sense is we see how it goes, and if we can then start to scale it up, then we can re-examine it. At the minute, it's the unknown, so we're going over to a national recruitment. So we've started to look at the impact by 2020, because effectively we will start to lose control of some of our recruitment processes. Now, we're quite worried about that, because we don't know what that's going to look like. And Lord Back and I have had some conversations quite openly about over-recruiting ahead of that, so that we've got a little bit of a buffer, so that we're not finding ourselves in a difficult point when we get to 2020. So there's quite a lot going on around change of recruitment processes, some nationally imposed, some we need to understand the impact of apprenticeships, and we need to make sure that we've got sufficient resilience to take us through what we think is going to be quite an unknown period. Because the issues that we're suffering is somebody that can leave, as a police officer, can give their notice today, in 28 days' time they leave. It takes us 18 months to replace that officer. So if I wanted to leave the police today, I can leave in a month. I can't because of some of the contractual issues for rank. But there is a reality of, in 28 days, a police officer leaves. To replace, you lose all the experience, all that knowledge, and it takes 18 months to get somebody back through the machinery. It's a big threat for us that we're having to work our way through.
I think the apprenticeship scheme is a really, really good initiative, and it's really encouraging that you've got a full body of 20 people already, and I really hope that you get the next lot actually full as well. Rattalal.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just following up what Melissa is saying. I know you just mentioned at the last paragraph, 18 months. From PCSO point of view, because you're already in the thing, or cadets, young cadets, the time process for them to become PC, if you like, how long is the process going through from the telephone conversation, passing through that process, and then recruitment to the end?
I mean, it's slightly quicker because you'd expect them to be vetted, and you can expect them, but they've still got to go through the process of going from being a PCSO into a police officer. There's certain concessions in terms of training, because you can consolidate the training down because they already know some of the basics. And actually, a lot of our recruitment has come from some of that area. So certainly, I know that there's been a lot of encouragement of people that are within the organisation to think about converting from either support roles, PCSOs, into officers, and that's ongoing all the time. But again, then the knock-on effect is you've then got to recruit them back in. So a lot of those PCSOs, you know, they are really quite well established in certain neighbourhoods. So if you take them out of a neighbourhood, put them through the police officer recruitment, with then into the, well, what do you do about recruiting backfill for them? So it's a fine balancing act, I would say.
Is it a general point, Marinissa?
Yeah,
or?
it's a really quick one.
Okay.
Sorry, which I completely forgot to ask, which is the the campaign difference, which you talked about, the competency-based questionnaire. It's really interesting. Is it a psychometric test? It's not. Okay, because I know a lot of people who do psychometric have said they're not culturally appropriate to do. So these are just straightforward competency-based.
Yeah, it's a competency-based questionnaire. So it's a series of questions on a computer, which then a computer will analyse whether you've hit the scalars. It's not a psychometric test.
But it's very similar because you've got
and that's why
the
we have
computer
some
analysing
issues with
it. Interesting.
Which is why we're one of the few forces in the country that decided to trial something different. And in particular, we're trialling telephone interviews because we found a huge success when we did that for our volunteers. When we got rid of the competency-based questionnaire for our volunteers and used telephone interviews, and that had a great impact.
Thank you.
The telephone interview, I think, is a really good initiative as well. It's not so frightening, I guess.
You also remove a lot of the cues that maybe you're making judgments about how you see people, so all you're doing is listening to what their answers are, which actually removes a lot of potential biases. It's quite interesting.
Keith.
Thank you, and thank you, Lynn, for this paper. It's good to see the change in the makeup, and I'm delighted about the numerical response we're getting of people who wish to serve as police. And so if I could address the Commissioner, in last night's local paper, I wondered, Lord Bark, do you have any concerns that recruitment and retention of all of Leicestershire police officers could be affected by incidents such as what was reported of the 20-year-old man who repeatedly kicked a Leicestershire police officer in the face but did not receive a custodial sentence? I understand the Chief Constable is considering appealing against the sentence.
I never comment on sentences. I don't think it's my role to comment on sentences. I'm too much someone who's practiced in the law for many, many years to know that that's the responsibility of not the police nor me. I have my own private views about it. I spoke at the second reading of the bill that will put up the amount of time that someone can spend in prison for assaulting an emergency worker, whether a police officer or an ambulance worker. You can probably guess my view on this, but I won't comment on any judge's sentence. It's not for me to do. The issue, there are issues arising out of this case, I think, that are of some importance, I have to say. It's all I'll say about this case. I do want to say something, if I may, about the discussion that's taken place, and I think this might be a good time, Chair, if I may. And they come in two parts. Really, as far as diversity is concerned, passion, I know for you, Rutland, except it is for Kirk and I, it really is among the most important things that we want to achieve. And I think Lynn would be the first to say we've not achieved them yet because we don't know what the final result's going to be, for example, on the third cohort. But there has been a sea change in attitude, I think, since we pressed the point. The Chief himself is absolutely committed, and he set up a goal group with our advice to which is, I think, doing a very, very good job in finding ways through this quite difficult task of making sure that our police force reflects the society in which we live, which I would have thought was absolute basic for a successful police force. Not only that, the positive action team, the 2 officers, one of them, should be noted, was part of the budget for this year so that we could have a second officer. Kirk and I see them every month to talk about how things are going. So it's an absolutely essential priority, and the report there, I think, is very helpful. Where I'm afraid I am less happy is in the way in which we have been dictated to in terms of recruitment of police officers. And I think Joe's questions were absolutely on the ball about that. I'm not against, of course I'm not against an apprenticeship scheme, although the truth is that the first cohort is, for good reasons, very, very undiverse. And indeed there was a picture in the Mercury last Saturday which shows all the very, promising young men and women who are going for this, and well done to them for getting onto it. But diversity, I'm afraid, isn't part of that particular. That is year 1, and we'll move on to year two. I've just passed round a couple of letters. It's a questionnaire from a guy called Ron Hogg, who's a very, very distinguished police and crime commissioner for Durham, who always get extraordinarily good HMIC results, maybe because they're tiny, I don't know, but they are good. Ron Hogg has the national lead for workforce, and he asked these questions around the new scheme. It's really around the old scheme, which should the old scheme just be abolished, as it were, very, very quickly, or should there be some more delay just to see how the new one is working before you get rid of the old one? I replied, and you'll see that at the top, saying my concerns were really his concerns, and Joe's concerns, to be honest. There are a number of them, but I am concerned. Paragraph 4 of my letter, I think, expresses how will the new scheme, which just limits, as Lynn has very fairly told us, recruitment to effectively getting a degree of some kind, will that limit unnecessarily those who might make really good police officers? Because which of us does not know of a police officer in our vicinity or during our life who would never pass an exam in a month of Sundays, frankly, but understand human nature and have an emotional intelligence that sometimes the cleverest people in the world don't have? And my concern is that those people will not be attracted necessarily to coming to doing an apprenticeship scheme. They just won't be attracted by it. They'll see the word degree and run a mile. That's my worry, and I think it's only fair I should express it to the panel. And that would be, to me, a crying shame. And I think it's one of the strengths of the British police system, not just here in Leicestershire, that you get people like that who have just an instinct for being a good police officer, who may just not be there. And I think I'm thinking of 2 groups of people in particular. One is, I very much hope BAME people will apply for the apprenticeship, and indeed for this year it does look as though those who are interested, that's different from applying, those who are interested is very high, and delighted about that. But my real fear, I think, is the white working class, to be honest. I'm putting it very bluntly. Will they, on the estates from which some of these outstanding police officers actually come, will they actually put in under this new scheme? So it seems to me it's too definite. It's too all-inclusive. And so what we're really doing in this letter from Ron Hogg and my response is to say, don't rush into abolishing everything about the old scheme. Just wait and see for a year or 2 to see if it works and that we're not losing out, cutting our own throats. Sorry to be a bit over the top about it, but that is my view, and I think a number of precinct crime commissioners, not to say quite a number of police officers at a senior level, think the same. Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to get that off my chest, really, rather than...
Thank you, Willie. I think one of the most important things that a police officer has is a connection and an ability to connect with the people that they're actually
That's what matters.
working with and dealing with each day. So, General?
General, I mean,
Okay.
it was a very passionate...
Sorry, it wasn't...
No, to a certain, I do agree with that, because I think you make some fundamental points, and I was really surprised about the national policy around degrees. It doesn't take into consideration the issue around social mobility, and you're right, about people who have emotional intelligence. It could go against the grain of diversity in terms of what it's setting. I could see a policy that says degree or the scheme itself. That you can kind of live with. So, absolutely kind of support what you're saying, and if any letters going through, absolutely.
Thank you.
Can I add one comment?
Yes.
I think, we're going into the unknown, aren't we? And I think the worry is that we've got to keep a real firm grip on it, because we can't go into the world of academia and theory and lose the practical bits that are really, really important about policing. So certainly from a personal perspective, I think we need to keep a real good handle on who's coming in the process. They've got the core values, skills, the operational things that they're going to need. And then I think the trick is aligning what officers get trained in within the context of ending up with a degree. So if you think about in policing, it's not that we expect all police officers to be walking around as criminologists. What we expect is a lot of things. So I talked earlier about problem solving within neighbourhoods. That is a hugely important thing for us to do, to get preventative, to look for solutions, to be innovative. Beat officers that have got good common sense are great at that. What we need to do is make sure that when they go through these modular training that we want them to do, to respond to modern day issues, that they get accredited to that, and that those credits then mean something. So I think we've just got to reframe what we perhaps think is a stereotypical degree, and think of it as all these officers are getting trained in different things. So as they get trained, shouldn't they get some form of credit, and couldn't that credit then be formalised in some sort of professional qualification? So I've got some really strong views in, do I think you need to be, academically walk in and you've got to have a degree? No, but I do think actually that what we expect officers to do and the training they get is really, really high level, and they should be warranted with some form of acknowledgement for the investment. Because I look at my own journey, years and years and years of courses, training, assessments, counts for nothing. Where actually, I think what some people are quite supportive of is, if you're going to go through that, if you're going to be a digital investigator working in cyberspace, there's a lot of skill involved in that. And actually, could we not accredit that and link it into part of a formal policing qualification? If that qualification is a degree, then that makes sense and it makes good sense. So I think we've got to put it in, ground the qualification in the good, common, practical application of what it means to be a police officer, and not let it get too carried away down one route.
At the end of the day, you're dealing with people, not paper. And it's the ability to listen and react to problems that you come across. If we can go through the report now, page by page. Page 35. 36. 37. 38. Ratalo.
'23. Mental support. You've got 20 female and only 9 BME. And 2 thingy. Do you not think that there is support, there is some work we require to do in that area?
We are continually looking at increasing the representation of our mentors, but obviously these are people who work in the organisation, so they're people who already do a very full and busy day job, and being a mentor is actually very emotionally time consuming, as well as all the paperwork that you're assisting people with. So I'd rather have volunteers who absolutely are embraced and want to do this wholeheartedly than almost cajole people into doing it, and maybe those people won't be as robust. But we are continually working with, in particular, our support networks. So we have a Black Support Network, a Hindu Police Association, Sikh Police Association, and Association of Muslim Police, and we are continually working with them to get increased mentors. But it's about the calibre of the people that we're choosing. And what I would say is all of those people have spent a lot of time and are really dedicated in doing this.
Just want to follow. In there, you mentioned 20 female. Yeah. Are we not discriminating against men?
I think you've got a point. Should it say mentees or mentors? Where it says mentees, should it not say mentors?
No, sorry. These are the people that are being
helped.
Being helped.
They're ones being helped.
Yeah.
Not the ones that are helping.
The informal mentor scheme is around formally informally mentoring those candidates from underrepresented groups. So some of the people who would identify as BME, some of those who would identify as LGBT and disabled may very well be men.
I don't think we'll do any interviews. I think we'll just keep quiet.
No, it doesn't, and I'll make sure that happens next time.
Page 40, 41, 42, and that concludes that report. So we now move on to the final paper, agenda item 9, the OPCC Youth Commission.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to ask Angela Perry, if I may, Deputy Chief Executive, to just introduce this report. And I'm very, very pleased to say that one member of my Youth Commission, we were hoping for two, but one's not very well today. Forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong, but it's Brumjit Gulati. Bramfit Gulati has come to answer questions and talk to the panel, as has, I think, been on the agenda for a while. I'm going to ask Angela if she will, with your permission, just talk through the report.
Yes, that's fine. And I believe you're really willing to actually meet people afterwards and talk to them. That's great. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just take you through some key points in the report, and there's a little bit more information hopefully I can add. So the Youth Commission, which was set up in 2013 under Lord Back's predecessor, but he has carried on with that. It has been refreshed in his time with us, and the aims of the Youth Commission are set out in paragraph 3. At the moment, there are 15 members of the Youth Commission. The youngest that we have is 16 years old, and the oldest is 25. If I can just give you a quick sort of resume of the type of young people we have with us. We have a young person who has been a victim of crime. We have a young person who's been a witness to a crime and supported a family member. We have a handful of students who are studying criminology and psychology at Leicester and De Montfort universities. And we have students from a number of schools within the Force area. And some of these are Welland Park Academy, Saul Valley College, Hamilton College, Beecham College, to name but a few. And we also have a member who is working very closely with the St Matthew's Estate in the city on big local projects initiative, as well as a student who is a brand ambassador for various companies, just to give you a flavour of the variety of people who make up the Youth Commission. Over the page, on page 46, the top of the page you have the demographics. I won't go through that in any detail. It's set out there for you. You will obviously notice, though, that geographically there is quite a concentration within the Leicester City area. We are commencing a recruitment campaign next month, and we will be looking at trying to geographically spread that around to the county areas a little bit more than is already represented. The aims of the Youth Commission in paragraph 7 of the report, when it was refreshed last, the young people met with the Commissioner, with the Deputy Commissioner, and they came up with 7 areas that they themselves wanted to concentrate on in the coming year, and they are listed there. If I can just go over the page onto the future work of the Youth Commission, if I can just mention the survey, which we will be launching later this month. The Youth Commission themselves have pulled together that survey, and it's really to get a feel for the concerns of young people within the force area. That will be an online survey. It will be promoted through social media platforms, through UK Youth Parliament, through the Youth Offending Service, through the Y, and through students at universities whose tutors have agreed to promote the survey throughout the wider membership of the universities. We will be looking at the results of that early in the new year. If I can go on to paragraph 10 and just mention the Youth Summit, which is going to be held on Tuesday the 6th of November. We have written to all schools within the force area. To date, we have 80 people roughly who have confirmed attendance. There's still a week and a bit to go, so we're hoping that number will rise. We are asking for 2 students and a member of staff from each education facility. So the programme is already set, and there will be 2 workshops where young people will be asked to talk about and consider child sexual exploitation, cybercrime, drugs and alcohol abuse, hate crime, knife crime, and stop and search, which are deemed to be areas of concern to young people. There will also be the survey undertaken at the event as well. Invites to that event have gone out, but can I say, I know the chair of this panel has been invited, but I think if any members of the panel were interested to come along, we'd be very pleased to see you at the event, so please let us know if you'd like to come along. If I can just, I won't go through everything in the report, if I can just go on to some examples of the work that the Youth Commission have done, and if I can just explain. They have worked with the force on the mental health first aid youth training that the force undertake, and I know that as a result of their feedback and involvement, the course itself was tweaked to take on board their comments. We have a member of the Youth Commission currently coordinating a video clip asking questions to youth groups that she has links with for Crime Stoppers Fearless campaign. And that is to raise awareness amongst professionals how young people feel about crime and how safe they feel living within this area. Youth Commission have already had meetings with the force head of engagement to advise on the best ways to communicate with young people, and I know that their comments have been taken on board with how the force interact and get messages out. And I also know one other thing, that the Youth Commission members have worked with the Force Knife Crime Coordinator as part of the Police Advisory Group on equalities, and have advised that how successfully the force could inform young people about the use of stop and search in the area. I won't go on anymore, Chair, because I've probably said more than I meant to anyway, but happy to take any questions. But I hope that's given a little bit more information than what was contained in the report.
Thank you, Angela. From my own point of view, from Harbour, we always go on about sharing information and communication. And what we've been trying to do is have more presentations at CSP meetings. And I think it'd be really, really useful for if there's any members of the Youth Commission, this is a question for our guest, if you like, if they would come along and actually give a presentation of how the Youth Commission works, what sort of work they do, what they discuss, because again, that's all information coming back, vital information coming back about the youth. And that's, you're our future. You're the next generation, so we need to know what you think and how we can change.
Chair, I'm sure we can do that. I don't know whether Bromley wants to do.
Definitely, I think it'd be vital to have young people across the table, and especially meetings like this. I think it's really important to have a youth perspective, and I think some of the points that were raised today about having closer links with the police and youth services as well, and stuff like this, it's a really important view that we take young people on, because a lot of the times it gets misinterpreted and misheard under reports, etc. So I think it'd be really important to have young people from the Police Youth Crime Board to come to those meetings.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Rattalel.
I just want to follow up from the chair, Angela, is even the community ward meeting within the city area, I think it would be very useful for the youth to come and hear from the youth itself, the engagement they do. I think then it would encourage other youth to come forward. So I think if you can also come to the community ward meeting, that would be the ideal thing.
Check, if I could just respond to that. I absolutely. I mean, we really do want the Youth Commission to be out and about there as much as possible. Can I add a little caveat? The young people that are with us, a lot of them are studying, some are working, and we've tried very hard to get people here today. As you can imagine, curriculums and commitments on their time. We will certainly accommodate whatever we can and will intend to, but I just think I ought to make that little caveat. I know how busy they are.
I appreciate that entirely, and we can understand that. I think we're very guilty sometimes as adults of making decisions that we think are right for the younger people, and we want to actually know what the young people think rather than actually make decisions for them. Merenissa first, and then Deborah.
Okay, can I just say, I mean, this is a really impressive initiative in terms of engaging young people. Just two questions for me. One is, obviously, this is a youth commission in relation to the police and crime commissioner and supporting you, but there is a youth commission that the city council, and I think there are youth commissions across that. How do you kind of link up in a sense, because it's really important that you do this on a collaborative basis. And the only other question that I have is around the age range. 14 to 25 is a huge age range. I know they're all young people, but from my perspective, having worked kind of in college and worked with other young people, 14 to 18, they experience crime and what they think about it, and the whole prevention agenda is slightly different to when they turn into kind of adulthood at the age of 18. I'm just wondering, I suppose it's a question for the PCC, whether for the future you're considering looking at, you're looking at a youth commission, but dividing into kind of two groups, or are there any changes afoot in the future?
Can I say yes? And the age range for me, I mean, I think a 14-year-old probably sees the world differently to a 23-year-old, and that's quite obvious. So, and in fact, we are looking at that as to how we format the Youth Summit Day, because you want everyone to have voice, and you're at different levels of confidence at different ages, obviously. So we appreciate that. We're quite aware of that. It is something we would give consideration to moving forward, particularly, I think, after our next recruitment round, and we'll see what we end up with in the age ranges from that. As regards to working closely with other councils, we're quite aware that there are other commissions in place, youth groups in place, and councils do have their own youth groups advising and linking in with. We're quite aware of that. We are starting to link in better with that work, and can I say we are at the moment trying to concentrate on working closely with the Y. As the Commissioner mentioned right at the start of this meeting, we don't have any members of our Youth Commission who are past offenders, and their voices, we're quite aware, also need to be heard. So we are working with the Y. We have got a group of young people there being pulled together that we are going to consult with separately. So it's an ongoing piece of work that is evolving all the time.
Can I just add to what Angela said? And I noticed you didn't say the 14 was too young. I don't think it is too young, because if you look at youth crime, horrible truth of our world today is that there are kids at 14 who've committed both serious and not so serious crime. And there, the view of fellow 14-year-olds is pretty important, I think.
Deborah.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask really how much you feel that you can influence the PCC and how much you feel listened to and can shape policies and things like that. And I'd also like to understand from the PCC how much they do listen to you. So both sides of the perspective, please.
So yeah, I think I'm just going to answer these questions quite together because I think it makes sense to do so. So I think in terms of integrating youth groups together, I'm part of the Young People's Council as well. So I bring a lot from the Youth Commission to the Young People's Council, and I bring a lot from the Young People's Council to the Youth Commission. So we did an event start of last year called Don't Hate, Educate, which was about preventing hate crime and how we can, as young people in schools, create more awareness on that. And it's happened for 2 years, and we are planning to carry on doing that event in partnership with the Youth Commission. So a lot is going on in terms of that aspect about interlinking, and I think your bit about how much do I feel listened to, I think I have it as equal voice on both groups, the Youth Council and the Youth Commission. We've had several meetings with our knife crime planning. I've managed to individually do a police icebreaker session within my youth club, which has been very beneficial in terms of bringing local police officers with young people and having an open debate that's not monitored through social media or etc., and just being able to do that and then reporting that back to decision makers on both groups around. So it's very, very upfront and very direct, I think, the work that I've been able to do. In terms of how we can improve the Youth Commission, again, it is about reaching out to these groups and reaching out to different areas, which I think would bring a different point of view into the group, but also having meetings more regularly in terms of our meetings, and to keep the consistency of those meetings going, I think would be an improvement to make. But I think at the moment we've got a lot of input in terms of how we do stuff locally, and it's not maybe always had at these sort of meetings. So having representations, which you mentioned about people not being able to attend and stuff like that, become barriers. But I think we have a lot of influence, and I feel strongly heard.
I don't think we listen enough to them, to be honest, being absolutely blunt. And I think that's one of the things we're looking at now, how we can get Kirk and I to hear more of what members of the Youth Commission think on different subjects. And I think that's part of the reform that's necessary. I don't want to exaggerate it. Obviously, we know what they've listened to their views, but I think we could do better, as it were, as PCC, to take more notice than we do, because they're a very valuable resource for us, and we need to use them as well as we can.
Any more questions? Well, I'd like to thank you very much for coming along and being so erudite in your explanations as well. It's quite inspirational to hear someone young with so much eloquence, and actually we should listen to you, and I'm sure Willie and his team will. I'm not going to go through the pages because we've actually covered it quite fully. That's item 10. Item 9 rather. Item 10 is dates of future meetings. The next meeting here is on Wednesday the 12th of December here at County Hall. The chairman didn't tell me there were any items that were urgent, so that concludes the meeting. Thank you very much for all for coming.